Well, good afternoon and welcome to what is now the 8th episode of COVID Connect on today, May 8th of 2020. And interesting update today. This may be the last time we're calling this COVID Connect. We were looking to transition the format. We'll still be talking about COVID as it's necessary, but we are going to probably start to transition as everyone is working now to get back on these rollout plans to get back to work, waiting for the potential of a second wave. So that's on the horizon too. We want to open the conversation up and talk about more things. So that's probably going to start happening next week. But the conversation will continue, and we'll always prioritize the COVID elements. And as we come to that milestone, I want to just once again thank all of these groups that you see up here on the screen: MishBio, Keystone, University of Michigan, the Med Health Cluster, Spectrum Health Innovations, the folks at Beaumont, Gentherm, Grand Valley State University, MEDC, Ann Arbor Spark, Public Sector Consultants, some of our friends at Celsi, and of course, the folks at TechDown Detroit, who got the word out one Thursday night when we first said we want to convene the community, and they made it happen. And so we're eternally grateful to them for starting this discussion that's now continued for these last 7 weeks. I want to just remind you of the ground rules as we go through. The webinar will be available. You probably got an email linking to last week's webinar. Use the chat box if you want to share information anytime, and that will also be available to everybody. Get off of mute if we say that you're live, and if you're just sharing general information, keep it brief: name, company, your needs, your efforts, your ideas, but we do want to hear from you, so please keep that coming. Into being, we do medical and life science product development. We have been really honored to be part of many efforts for EUAs and other things these last 2 months. And we're here to answer questions or do more in-depth things as you need, but please just let us know how we can help you. What we're going to do today, as usual, is cover the latest news. We've got some special guests today to talk with you, and we're going to review another EUA update. There was an EUA update this week, and then we'll do some Q&A, and once again, a community open forum. And with that, I want to go over to the news. We are going to talk about a few things. The first of which is, I think a lot of you have found this PPE and bed tracking page that the state of Michigan is maintaining to be really useful. I think you're going to see that there's a good amount of availability of beds at the moment. That's not to say that PPE has made it to all corners, and we're still seeing some gaps in surgical masks here with Beaumont. We're seeing some surgical gown gaps with Dickinson Memorial Healthcare System. We're seeing some of both of those with Hurley. We are seeing Mid-Michigan Health is missing. So there's a few places that still do have short supplies of these things. And you can go to this page. Someone just emailed me before the show and said, what was the link to that again? So again, if you have a question, just reach out. But this is a great resource. We think the state's doing a great job of making these numbers available to us so that we're not all in the dark as to what's going on. So that is greatly appreciated. To that same end, I think it was a phenomenal effort that was put together this TCF Center Field Hospital. They didn't really have that many people in the end, but the effort was certainly impressive that went into that. That is now closing down, and they've discharged all their COVID patients. But that being said, what everyone's looking for now, I think, is that second wave. What's going to happen? We don't know, and that's why this discussion continues. We started updating you a couple weeks ago on what the Attorney General was doing, and the challenges there continue. They are still warning us of websites selling coronavirus-related products that never arrive. And if you want to know what the Attorney General's been up to, you can go to the website there. But they are getting complaints from folks who are basically saying we ordered stuff and it never showed up. So as much of a shame as that is, it's good to know that folks are working to track that down. As the discussion morphs from how do we get things like PPE to where it's desperately needed on a moment's notice, the discussion is shifting to what does this look like long-term? Businesses are asking, what is it going to mean for us to reopen? How do we keep track of what's happening? Is there going to be a second surge? What do we do? Because we were caught we didn't have what we needed when this all came down. And I think everything from the federal government all the way down to your local businesses saying, what should we be doing? What should we have on hand? That's where a lot of this discussion is going to shift. Just one example of that, Mass Device saying that AdvaMeds, it's a med device advocacy group. Scott Whitaker was saying, hey, we need more cooperation. We need more government and public cooperation, private businesses as well. And as we are thinking about that as a community, and I'd love your thoughts on this, even during our open forums, as we're talking about that, we have to remember that back in 2009, when H1N1 hit, the call went out for more ventilators. We need a cheap ventilator that can be gotten out. $500 million was spent on a design of a ventilator that eventually got shelved because it didn't seem like it was in the midterm business interests of the company that shelved it. Well, what's going to stop that from happening again? This is the time to start having those conversations. How do we make it in the interests of government and business and the community to take preparedness actions? This is something that we often forget about when things are going well, and it's not in our financial interest to take those steps. But I'd really love it if the community would start to have that discussion. How are we going to make sure that we take some reasonable steps in those times of peace, shall we say, to make sure that there are resources there? Now, another thing I want to let you know about is NIH, I'm sorry, National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering has this solicitation for proposals, pretty high dollar amounts associated with it. I've gotten this from a couple places, most recently Michelle Larkin from FFMI at U of M. Thanks, Michelle. And our friends at VentureWell are participating in this. So either through NIH or through VentureWell, there's multiple ways to get connected here, either as a mentor or as a company submitting for funding. But the focus here is on rapid acceleration of diagnostics. They're calling it RADx, and that they are trying to get diagnostics created. And of course, that's been a up and coming thing. And to that end, we've got today on the call, Brandon McNaughton, who's the CEO of Acadium Life Sciences. They work on buoyant microbeads to capture and isolate various targets. And I asked Brandon if he would come on today. Brandon, you can unmute your mic and your video, because I thought it'd be really interesting to hear from him about what they are seeing in terms of the diagnostic area. I think a lot of us go, oh, it's a COVID test. Great. But there's a lot more detail to it than that. There's a lot of challenges. We did hear from Vanessa Kelchner a few weeks ago from Acadium also about that. And today we're going to hear from Acadium CEO Brandon McNaughton. Can you hear me, Brandon?
I can. Can you hear me as well?
Yeah, go ahead and start your video too, if you can.
All right. Do you, I am just now looking the button.
We've got your slides. Yep.
All right. So you can see the slides. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry about that. My video share seems to have disappeared. I don't know where that went. So here it is. Start video. Apologies, everybody.
There you go.
Hi. It's nice to see everyone. Yeah. Thanks, Gene, for having us on today. So when Gene invited me on, we talked about a couple things. One was, what is the current sort of state of testing and what are the challenges? So I thought I'd take a few minutes to go through that, and I'll try to keep it brief. And then I'll just wrap up with at least what we're doing at Acadium to try to address some of those challenges in diagnostic testing. And as with many problems, it's complex and there's many different solutions needed. So I think, in the end, we'll need a lot of different approaches to make it work. So at Acadium, we're a next generation isolation company. Like Gene said, we have a product where we use flotation to isolate targets like DNA, proteins, and cells. And I'll show you a video of that at the end. But just real quick, I'm not going to spend too long on each slide. I know there's a lot of words on this one. Many of you, I know, are already aware of this resource, but for those who aren't, I really like to bring up uptodate.com because it's a very reliable source of information. And that's for everything from what's current standard of care for treatment, but it's also how our diagnosis performed, and even the detection methods that are out there. And so it's a very comprehensive tool. It's something that I use very commonly if I'm looking at anything for work. I also use it on a personal basis. But I find a couple things interesting here. Like they actually have numbers behind the different symptoms. Sometimes you see those without the numbers. Other information that they'll share is like, what do we know with confidence, and maybe what isn't proven yet, which is under that other info. But one thing that is definitely still being understood is the transmission. It's commonly understood that the respiratory droplets are what spreads the disease. But how long you're infectious, what window is a little bit unknown. But the transmission is clear that that you can spread it potentially without knowing that you're infected. And this gets back to the importance of diagnostics, which is why I share that. But why does the testing matter? Well, this is just a recent image from how many tests have been done cumulatively in the US. And as of May 5th, that was 7.5 million. So if you stop for a second and think about what our population is and what that number needs to be to make effective decisions. So for example, right now, a lot of states are going back to work. A lot of people are going back a little bit to more life as normal. But we're short of our current capability and throughput of tests. So some people have said 1 million tests per day is what we need to be able to do. I've heard even 10 million tests per day. So we are orders of magnitude off of what we need to be able to do. And so that's a current challenge. And so throughput is a real issue right now. So the thinking is, how do you make effective decisions if you can't do testing? So
right now we're 328 million people in the US. So this is a drop in the bucket.
Exactly. And it goes back, Gene, to what you're saying with the long-term issue of how do we reopen, right? So, what if there's a test that, you could do on site at the workplace? What if there's a test that you could do at schools, right? This gives you the opportunity, if it was fast enough, to isolate and make decisions. Now, there's different work kind of driving toward that. There's even, as it's a longer-term issue, there's even questions of environmental testing, which is, can I swab a door handle and see if there's COVID on it, right? This is real right now, and probably will be in place over the next year. And so you get into the importance of testing. Some people even think that even without a vaccine, we could actually reduce infection to zero if we had instant testing and enough of it, right? So you basically decrease the infection because you could test people and isolate them. So that's why testing is so important. And I thought I'd just take a minute just to kind of show a few thoughts here on different types of tests. So, you hear about, serological tests and, testing for the RNA. Well, it's interesting because what you test indicates or is related to the different point of infection. So what you find is when you're first infected, you might be able to detect viral RNA. Over time, that the presence of that goes away, and then you just see the immune system response to it, which would be the antibodies, which are the IgG and IgM. And so when you see the different tests, those are useful at different points of sort of infection and response to the virus. And so what you see is, again, serological or the antibody presence goes up over time. And so it's not, just that you're doing a test, but what type of test and when. And that depends on what kind of decision you want to make. Either maybe it's a clinical decision for the earlier stages and isolation, maybe later stages, it's can people go back to work if it turns out that we'll build immunity to this, which is still even unknown. So getting into the specifics of testing, commonly right now, what's considered the gold standard would be a nasal swab going to look for the RNA and using something called real-time PCR, which is a molecular diagnostic. There's issues with that. Like there's a shortage right now of these swabs. So it sounds crazy, but logistics is often a huge problem under pandemics. Like sometimes you even have everything you need, but logistics, if that breaks, that's a big issue. And so blood is another area where you can access antibodies. You can access potentially the other components or reaction to the virus. But, there's different ways to do that. You could do a blood draw. You could do a finger prick. There's different levels of those targets in the blood. But then, anytime you want to get tested, you have to have somebody draw the blood typically. It's usually not a self-draw. And so each of these different methods have their own limitations. One that seems to be under discussion right now is saliva. So what if you could just spit, into a cup, essentially, drop it off, walk away, and get the answer in 10 or 15 minutes. So there's not as many tests, and it's certainly not a gold standard, but there are papers out there with the testing to show there is presence of antibodies even, and also the virus itself, to try to do either a serological test or a nucleic acid test. And so these are I just thought to show a picture of some of the devices out there. So you find for nucleic acid testing, it's very common to have a big automated system. That would be the gold standard, using the nasal swabs. Doing blood tests, you can do more of like an immunoassay or an antibody test, where you get a sort of a strip, like a pregnancy test, and you see it's there. That's like the Roche has the one at the top there. And then the saliva test, there's only, I think, or just recently, one approved under EUA, which is a modification of a nucleic acid test. That's an Applied Biosystems device there shown at the right. And again, I just show this to kind of give you a sense of what's going on and what's out there, and that it's not as necessarily simple as, just a little stick with a line and it shows that it's there. I won't go into this, but for those of you who are curious and don't already know, there are two main mechanisms of action for detecting this. One is, again, nucleic acid testing, where you're essentially taking RNA and then creating a DNA and then detecting the DNA's presence using molecular methods. And so saliva, that seems like the way that that's been approved under EUA. And then the one on the left there is a sort of standard with the nasal swab. The middle is the blood test, where you're looking for the antibody. And this is the same way that pregnancy tests work. It's called a lateral flow assay. And essentially, if you have your target there, it's usually sandwiched between two antibodies, and then you get a detection event. So that's the current state, so what's out there right now for testing. So what's the challenges? So I thought I just, sort of back of the envelope, based on what's reported by these companies, show you the limitations. So this is the throughput of these different testing methods. So if you look at the bottom there, you see that for a nucleic acid type test, you might be able to do, 1,146, for example. There are tests per instrument per day. The blood testing is about 7,200. So just trying to do 1 million tests, for example, to take the 7,200 tests per day capability, you need 138 placed instruments. Increase that by 10, you're at 1,380. And we even need to go beyond that to properly test the population just in the US. So you're starting to see the challenge then of, we don't have the throughput and capability we need. And also, even when you look at these complicated pieces of equipment, think about if you called Thermo or Roche or PerkinElmer right now and said, hey, can I order 1,000 of your automated instruments? The answer will be no, because they don't have 1,000 to ship. So this is a real pressing issue with not a clear solution. And, this just gets to my slide here. What are the current challenges with testing? So throughput, I talked about, other ones are time to result. So nucleic acid tests commonly can take 3 to 4 hours. Sensitivity, that's both in the assay, but also in determining, who's infected, who isn't, making sure you don't have false positives, false negatives. So sort of specificity and sensitivity. Supply chain is an interesting one, right? That goes back to the logistics. And I included an image here that I like. But it's interesting, right? If you need antibodies to do the serological test, or you need proteins, or even need the nucleic acids, that's may not be something you can order from your raw material supplier. Fortunately, at Acadium, we commonly order antibodies. We haven't ran into this yet, but that's a real problem. And then the others are access, cost, especially as this is deployed worldwide. And so that's where we get interested. With our technologies, we both have a way to isolate things like RNA, but we also have a detection and diagnostic capability and some intellectual property. And so we've definitely prioritized our capability. And so that, brings me to this slide here. And so one area we're working on is the throughput. So when you use something like a microbubble, it's a very simple way to separate RNA. I'll just show you a video before I wrap up. This is the microbubbles. The top layer there is a microbubble layer. So when this is mixed with the sample, just under gravity, it self-separates in whatever container you have. And with these automated pieces of equipment, what I didn't talk about and what isn't shown is they actually use magnetism to do this, which requires big magnets on that platform, which means every time you want to run another plate or sample, if you will. I mean, they come in 96 or 384 at a time. You actually have to increase the linear foot of that piece of equipment. So if I want to double my testing, I have to order another device. So that's where something simple like this, you potentially could double the throughput without having to buy another piece of equipment. So we've been discussing this with some partners, and something that, you know, we've put more interest into, and there's more significance to, I think, right now. The other is to actually, and this is shown on the right, the other is to actually do a diagnostic. So this works similar to that antibody or serological test. And what you see, what's shown here, and I don't have enough time, of course, to get into all the details, but if you're interested, I'm happy to talk about it. But just real briefly, it's the same idea where you're detecting your analyte in a sandwich form, just like that antibody test. And when the analyte is present, you see there's this line. When it's absent or negative, you don't see the line form. And so this is something else. I would say this is more exploratory. The one on the left, we've already started. We're working on it. The one on the right, we are in discussions with a couple groups about as well. And in fact, Gene, that RADx is one thing we're thinking about applying to. We don't typically apply for grants. We'd rather have a commercial partner. And so in terms of, you know, this, I guess, want to give a brief summary of what we're doing. And, you know, for those of you who are on the phone, you know, the thing we're looking for right now is, you know, we're not trying necessarily to become the diagnostic company ourselves. We often partner and co-develop and ideally co-market with a company that already is a diagnostic company with channels to sell it. And so we are currently exploring co-developments and partnerships in these two areas. So, you know, if anyone is on the phone who sees this, and I would say, or even from a research point of view, like I said, we're applying to a grant, would be interested to talk about this. That's one of the things I wanted to bring up and ask for from the community. So that's a quick run through of at least our opinion of the current state of testing and then how we're approaching it and what we're doing to contribute to address to some of those throughput issues. Like the point of care one on the right, we're very excited about, because it's so simple, it can be done pretty much anywhere. You know, you could even envision a at-home test. I mean, that's sort of the ultimate. But anyways, I'll just stop there. Appreciate the time, Gene.
Yeah, that's great, Brandon. I really appreciate that. I'm going to open up really quickly for questions. If anyone has a perspective or a question, I appreciate the overview that you gave, Brandon. And I think it's interesting. Feel free to raise your hands if you're in the online environment there. And while we're waiting for those to come in, I found it very interesting just to distinguish between where in the phase of the illness are you, where are you in that, and what kind of a test is more appropriate. I don't think those of us who aren't doing the diagnostics actively don't even stop to think, oh, there's different responses I'm going to have at different points during the infection. Let's see, I don't have a name here, but somebody on a Samsung device. Okay, without a name, you're live at the moment. Feel free to try talking if you raised your hand. You're muted at the moment. Go ahead and unmute. We're gonna go over to Parker Finn. You are live with us. Just unmute your mic. It's a day for technical difficulties, Brandon. We're gonna get this working here.
I got to kick it off with not being able to share my video.
Parker, can you hear us? Go ahead and unmute your mic and you'll be live with us. It's interesting. I've had two people here who couldn't unmute their mics, and I'm not quite sure what's going on there. But
Gene, I'll also put my contact information in the chat after I stop sharing.
Yeah, that's great if you would, and if you can hang on for a few minutes, if we get somebody back through with a question that can actually unmute. I don't know, Steve, on our end, if you have any idea as to why those two. Nothing seems to have changed in terms of the interface here, but we will come back if there's any questions. Brandon, thank you so much for presenting that to us, and I think this is going to be a big part of the discussion as we go forward. Is this testing, and also how are companies?
We do have a question here from Parker in the chat.
Oh, thank you, Steve. Okay. And I also see Dante Bishop there, you said can't see my audio controls. If you guys are having trouble with the tech, getting the audio to work, feel free to plug it into the chat, just like Steve noted. I'm seeing that here. Thank you, Steve. So Parker asked, wondering if you have opinion of latest CRISPR developments. And he said, I'm thinking of the CRISPR test. Is that enough information to
Yeah.
response?
Yeah, CRISPR essentially like the gene editing technique, and there are, some of the idea. CRISPR, if you don't know about it, is almost can be applied to anything. I joke that if you're anti-GMO, you should be progressive and be anti-CRISPR to give you a sense of what that is if you weren't already familiar. But it is being applied to many different things. So diagnostics is certainly one of them. What I've seen and heard that is it's very promising, but it's still early. If I remember right, there is one maybe approved test. I don't know if you've heard that as well. But I haven't heard as much of that being applied to COVID and if it solves the problems that I listed before. Because I guess my view typically is that we have a lot of good detection platforms. And sometimes you can build on those to solve the problem very quickly. So I think part of the challenge is, are we trying to solve the problem in a month, in 6 months, or like 5 years? And CRISPR feels like something that's a little bit further out. But I could be wrong. I mean, there's several startups that we've interfaced with that are in fact working on CRISPR diagnostics. Haven't heard that they've applied it yet to COVID. So if you've heard otherwise, I'd be happy to hear the information you've been seeing as well.
That's great. Nadeem, you are live if you unmute your mic.
Hi, good afternoon from Grand Rapids. Appreciate the opportunity. So
Yeah.
I have an interesting product that I shared earlier. It's a device that, since we are moving back into opening our facilities, is needed, I think, to do temperature measurements. So this device really captures temperature for individuals coming into a factory or a work environment and alerts them, and then there's facial recognition as well. So it's pretty neat. And I'm not sure how to share it, but should I put it into the chat or should I put it into the?
Yeah, feel free to, and we're gonna have an open forum later if you've got a little more you'd like to say about it. Did you have a question for Brandon at the moment?
No, I'm sorry. That's all. I thought I was getting.
Oh no, that's just fine. Yeah, please put all your company information into the chat with a description as to what it does. I mean, it sounds like it's part of the world of diagnostics, and so we would love to hear about that. Please do plug that into the chat. And if there's more to say during the open forum right at the end, we'd be happy to have you back.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah,
sorry about this.
No worries.
Yeah.
I've got Olaf with his hand raised. Olaf, do you have a question for Brandon? Just unmute and you'll be with us.
Looks like it's still muted. There it goes.
There he is. Olaf, can you hear us? Olaf, can you hear us?
Now?
Yep.
Yeah? Oh, okay. All right.
There you are.
Work with a plugged-in headset. Maybe that's a more common problem. So, Brandon, you mentioned before the number of tests that any particular technique can do for a particular instrument. So there was the maybe now famous or infamous press conference where President Trump held up this booklet, these 50-something pages or whatnot, with 5,000 locations, and each of them allegedly has one of these devices to process the sample that is then provided either from swabs or whatever. So how does that relate to the number of, you said, like, if you want to do 1 million every day in the US, we need 1,138, test kits. So, because now it sounds like there should be more than those number of test kits in the US. So can you explain the discrepancy and what the real problem then is in order to go to higher throughput per day?
Yeah, so I guess first the comment there about, like, if they're already placed, do we still need more? This gets into a little bit of philosophy, I think, of how you respond to it and how you want to manage it. But there's a lot of talk of like, how do we sort of unscare the population, right? Like that's part of, okay, like if we're going to have a sporting event, do we test everybody who comes in, right? Or do we just open up sporting events? I mean, these are real questions that affect real economy. And if I have a test that works in 5 minutes and costs 50 cents, maybe you do test 100,000 people, right? So these are the sort of things that people are discussing. On the workplace, it's another one where we've had some discussions with some organizations that want to test entire cities. Like LA announced that recently that, they want to test the whole city. So if you're a workplace, you don't have one of those instruments, right? Like if I don't think Ford or GM has them, but what if they did? And so this gets back to something that's higher throughput and more accessible could then be, deployed more broadly. And so that's the sense I have is, there needs to be more placement or more accessibility. If you could go to CVS, that's great. But can you get all your employees to go do that, every day initially or once a week or whatever it is?
Right.
I think the throughput, right? Ideally, you have no required equipment. So it's just, if it's truly, as simple as a piece of paper, it doesn't need a reader, doesn't have the instrument. And that's what we get excited about at Acadium. So a lot of our work was to simplify what exists. And so what we envision with our point of care device would be something you don't need a piece of equipment to do. And the potential of that is very exciting. Doing it is the other piece. And so that's where, something like that is earlier in development. But ideally, you have a test that works instantly and that doesn't require any equipment and it's low cost. If you do that, you can basically test the population, do the test wherever you want, school, workplace, sporting event. That's really the ultimate solution.
Cool.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you, Brandon. Awesome.
Thanks, Olaf, for your question. Appreciate that. And thank you, Brandon. Really appreciate your popping on and for all you guys are doing and for giving us that overview. And I think that's hopefully we can have you back at some point to keep us up to date, because a lot of us don't understand the ins and outs of how the diagnostics work. And that's a really useful thing. I appreciate you being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again. Next up, I want to invite our friend Colin Dillon, who's the Data and Strategy Manager for Pure Michigan Business Connect PMBC at MEDC, Michigan Economic Development Corporation, to come on live with us. Just unmute your mic and video. There he is, Colin. Welcome to the program. You guys have been working behind the scenes, aggregating and pulling together information. And I just recently this week saw a spreadsheet make its way around that was one of the most glorious data resources I've ever seen, because you guys have been, I'll let you talk about it, but you guys have been pulling together a lot of the manufacturer information for PPE and other things like that. And not only doing that, but actually starting to ask the question that we all knew needed to be asked was, do these people really have these things? We talked about Attorney General Nessel running into people ordering stuff and then it not being there. Tell us more about what you guys have been doing and what resources we can avail ourselves of.
Sure, and thanks for having me. For everybody on the call, just to give a little bit of background. So the program that I work for is called Pure Michigan Business Connect. We're the state of Michigan's business-to-business platform, and we're situated within the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, which is the state of Michigan's economic development entity. Most of the time throughout the year, we support various industries and help the global supply or global demand connect to the Michigan supply base. Obviously, with everything that's going on, almost all of our efforts over the past couple of months have been dedicated to helping people, not just from the state of Michigan, but from around the U.S. but primarily here in Michigan, connect to the Michigan supply base to find PPE items. Initially, that was primarily hospitals and other healthcare organizations, and then assisted living and other facilities like that. As we look over the next few weeks for suppliers or for businesses to get back to normal, and that's everything from manufacturers to construction, here in the next week or so, to normal office workers and stuff like that here towards the end of the month. We know that there's going to need to be a lot of PPE purchased. Our program had been working for a long time to help the state's Emergency Operations Center work with suppliers here in the state to aggregate materials and get them to the SEOC so that they could be distributed. And what we started doing, and we've had an event or an initiative posted online for about a month and a half now. It's called the PMBC COVID-19 procurement platform. And through that, we've been taking in demand from Michigan businesses and also suppliers from the state that have said what they need and what they can provide. And so I'll be sure to post the link to those forms in the chat here later on, so that everybody can access that. But one thing that we noticed when the form was open to all companies, and we've since limited it to Michigan companies, we were getting a lot of things that definitely didn't quite look right, and most of what was coming in from out of state, and particularly overseas, and it was from just things that didn't immediately pass the eye test. And so what we've done and what we've spent a lot of time doing is that as suppliers have been coming to us, we've been trying to ask in our forms, and our forms have evolved over the past few weeks. I think this is the third or fourth iteration. We've really started asking some very detailed questions about what companies have, and some of that is availability, some of it's costs, some of it's FDA certification, and some other things like that. Are they here in the U.S.? And we've done that for about a dozen or so PPE items, and then are moving into things like temporary walls and partitions and things like that companies are going to need to make sure that people can keep a safe distance in the office. And then some other products that don't quite neatly fit into a PPE bucket, but are going to be required to come back. And so we're putting that together. The form, the workbook that G and I shared with you, the updated version of that is available to download by anybody. The only thing that you need to do is create an account on our platform, which is called Connect Space, and then you'll have access to the FAQ and supplier list function. But our goal is really to provide, we noticed that there was a lot of lists that were floating around, some lists that were on people's websites, some lists that were going around in spreadsheet form. Ours is a spreadsheet, it's a workbook, Excel workbook. But we were asked by some partners and agreed that it was a good idea to try to consolidate some of that, hopefully develop some sort of concise resource. And I think that we're in a good position as the state to do that, given the great interlocal relationships that we have with a lot of other regional economic development entities and private organizations and chambers of commerce and things like that. And I think that we've done a really good job. We're definitely looking to get the word out to suppliers that may not know about the platform, to make sure that we have their information so that we can be passing it along. Basically, the way that it works is when a company submits their demand through through our platform and they tell us what they need, they'll have access to the workbook, and then it's really up to them to reach out to the companies on the list to see what the product availability is. We're not saying that these companies are vetted. We're not medical experts. We're not, working with these companies day to day. These are the responses that have come through us. We've tried to ask detailed questions to give people an idea of what the companies each offer. But it's still up to the purchasers to do their own due diligence to make sure that what they're getting is legit. But I think that we've done everything that we can as the connection piece and how we're set up to do everything that we can to make sure that we're putting reputable, good companies out there. I don't want to take a ton of time. I want to make sure that anybody can ask questions that needs to, but again, please let anybody that can make PPE products and other safety related products to help manage the spread of this aware of the link, and then if you know of anybody that, or if your companies need PPE as you start looking to go back, we've got the ability to handle that too. So
That's great, Colin. No, I really appreciate that. And if you have a question for Colin with PMBC, please raise your hand, and we'd love to have you ask that. Yeah, when I saw that spreadsheet come around, I was like, yeah, this is exactly what needed to happen. And of course, I think you have to, unfortunately, have to repeat the disclaimer that, you guys haven't vetted these companies, but you tried to ask some intelligent questions about it. Do you have any examples of like the kinds of questions you've been asking the companies?
Yeah, so let me just kind of pull up here. So for N95 masks, for instance, which we know are a big thing, we've got, stock. Is it in the US? Is it NIOSH certified? What's the cost? And minimum and maximum order quantities is a big thing too, because some companies may only need a little bit. If you've got a smaller operation, maybe you don't need a ton of things, but we're working with some suppliers who can help aggregate some of that demand, place bulk orders, and help meet the needs of those at a reasonable price. For gowns, for instance, we ask about the specific materials and specific. I don't necessarily know what all of these means. We worked with the state to do this, but ANSI, AAMI, PB 700 or 70 standards, ASTM, F2407. We do ask some detailed stuff. Again, I'm not a medical person, but we based a lot of this off of the state and the various questions that they were asking too, the SEOC. And so we're hopeful that, again, by seeing the information, by having some of this up front, that you're able to see, okay, they responded, they knew what this was. And so hopefully that means that's something that they know what they're talking about and what they're producing.
And get a chance to weed some things out. Yeah, well, and I know we've got a few suppliers on the call. I'm seeing a note from Stephen Braddock, and I'm seeing one from Bob Becker. Bob's got 100,000 face shields in Shelby Township. So hopefully Bob and Stephen, you guys can connect.
Let me put the link here into the chat.
It looks like we've got a couple of questions. I've got one from Dante Bishop. Dante, can you hear us?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Dante Bishop. I have a question. I have 3 clients. One is a county government and 2 other health systems that have asked me to help them secure the 3M certificates, the 3M 1860 and the 8210 masks. I've had a hard time because I understand that the minimum order quantities for those are at least 1 million units, and that's still a small number. I'm wondering, is there an organization that helps aggregate these orders or consolidate them so that I can get them their mask? They asked me about a week ago, and I just feel like I'm running into either a bunch of pirates or a bunch of dead ends, and I'd really like some guidance in this process if you can help.
Great question.
Yeah, and yeah, I certainly can understand the frustrations with that. That gets to what I just mentioned with us trying to identify folks that can act as those aggregators of demand. And so if there's only a few companies, or if you only need a few, or maybe need 500 or something like that, that we can get those. We haven't yet gotten a relationship in place for N95s. But I think that we're close. What I would encourage you to do is make sure that we get your demand in, so that we know who to get the information to. And then from there, and again, on the list, you can hopefully see maybe there's some new companies that you haven't talked to yet, where you can reach out to them and see. And I will say too that the companies that are on our list as of right now are Michigan companies, or at least have operations here in Michigan. We're working on an out-of-state list, but again, we want to make sure that you know, we're doing everything that we can to highlight the Michigan businesses here,
Sure.
and fill in the gaps with the out-of-state companies.
Sure. And to that extent, you can include me because the county government started off with the order for 10,000 units of each. I asked her if she could call some of the towns within the county and the cities. She responded in 5 minutes. So there's a great measure of desperation. But 5 minutes later, she came back with 80,000, and now I'm up to 400, but it's still a small number. So I am working as a buyer's agent of sorts, but if I can pool with you and whomever else, I think we can get an order in that can satisfy everyone's needs.
Yeah, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my email address here in the chat. If anybody wants to email me for any questions that they may have, feel free to do that, and we can deal with those on a case-by-case basis.
That's
Okay.
great question, Dante, and thank you, Colin, for that. That's awesome. Appreciate that. In fact, it's one of the thoughts that's been on my mind is, you know, we're waiting to see, is there going to be a second surge? But the surge that's certainly coming is these reopenings and all the PPE that folks are going to need. And I'm starting to wonder, you know, do we really realize how big that could be, which is pretty big. Question from Michael Henderson. Michael, you are live. Just unmute your mic, Michael. Okay, we're going to wait for Michael to get his mic unmuted. I'm going to allow Olaf back on here. Olaf, just unmute your mic. You had a question for Colin?
So now that I can unmute, I'm going to shower you guys with questions.
Okay.
So Colin, can you clarify the platform that you're having now? Is that for suppliers from Michigan, but people from outside Michigan can also list demand? Or what is the regional boundary now?
As of right now, the demand is also limited to Michigan. Again, we you know, particularly as we're looking at opening up the state, we want to make sure that we don't get flooded with demand from outside of the state that potentially could limit the supply that Michigan businesses have access to. So for right now, both the supply and demand are limited to Michigan companies. That could change, but I think that we're going to be in a measured approach to that, particularly as we see what the demand is over the coming few weeks and what the supply base can respond to that with. And you know, it's going to be kind of fluid, a lot like most of the other response stuff to this has been.
Great. Question from Michael Henderson.
Hello, Colin, how are you doing? And you also, Jane. You did put your email address up there. We are a provider of PPE, and we currently have some things in stock right now, and we will be able to get greater stock that is available to us in the United States right now. So I do want to touch bases with you, anyone else, because we do know the need. By them reopening, it's going to be a major demand out there, and we would like to be part of the solution.
Great, thank you for that, Michael. Appreciate that. And yeah, Colin's put his contact information in the chat, and if you don't grab it today, it'll come around with the
yeah, and really the
email.
The fastest thing is just going to be to just go to the link that I posted to the forms, the pmbc.connect.space, and just go to there's a personal protective equipment and safety products supplier intake form. That's your best way to start. Like I said, we'd love to have your information in there. We'd love to be passing it along. That's the most efficient and effective way for us to do that.
Very good, very good. Well, I don't see any more questions right now, Colin. This is most helpful, and I really, like I said, when I saw that spreadsheet come around, I thought, okay, this is good. Someone's actually put the time in to really make the first pass at this, and it really was really cool. So I'd encourage everybody to get registered there and get a hold of that spreadsheet if you're either supplying or in need of PPE. And once again, we have to say, Michigan, the state of Michigan has not vetted the suppliers, but certainly done a great job of asking the first line of questions so that you can do your vetting job when you make contact with them. Colin, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Gene, I'm going to jump in real quick.
Is that Nikki?
No, this is Adrian.
Adrian, yes.
There are a lot of good contacts and info coming up in chat, but it's going to only all panelists. If it goes to all panelists, the rest of the attendees don't see it. So if you have information for all the attendees, make sure you change over the bottom two to all panelists and attendees.
Oh, very good. Yes, please chat not just to the panelists. There's only a few panelists, but make sure that it's to all panelists and all attendees. I'm seeing that now. Maybe can you rattle off a list there with me? I'm seeing Demizio Davis, Kate O'Hara.
There's a couple of.
Looks like there's quite a few, but again, a lot of it looks to be related to PPE suppliers and the products that you all are able to offer. Again, I encourage you to make sure I'm sure that we will get quite a bit of demand coming over the next few weeks, and so you know, your information will get great visibility. We just want to make sure that we've got it.
Yep, and to everyone, don't hesitate to repost your comments to all attendees as well. So once again, Colin, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here. Great. Well, next up, I want to invite our last guest, who is Christopher Griffen, and this is just a neat story. Christopher is the technical director of Great Lakes Composites Institute up at Bay Mills Community College, up by Sault Ste. Marie, actually, in the UP. Chris, you can unmute your mic. I guess you're not sharing video because you were having some bandwidth issues, but I got to say, if I were going to be isolating in lockdown in a location, I think somewhere in the UP would be my selection. So how did you pull that one off, Chris?
Yeah, we're perfect for that. Hello, everybody. How we doing?
That's good to have you. Yeah, so it sounds like you've been doing some builds of PPE up there, and then in fact you got to the point where you were able to sort of share your knowledge, and I think through somebody who knew Adrian, you guys got connected, and now just down the road from us in Clinton, you guys are actually helping them get ramped up for some work. Tell us just a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we started looking at one of the benefits we had was that obviously we're only 5 to 10 people for every square mile. So that was a good starting point. We were roughly 3 weeks behind in the first phase of COVID. And we began making face shields as probably the primary first line. And that began 5 weeks ago. Right now we're at about 90 recipient organizations in the UP. After that, duration manufacturer. One of the biggest issues we have found is that we wanted to extend that based on requests to move that into lower and southeastern Michigan. So this is how this started with the group out at Clinton Community, as well as the contacts with Adrian to talk about what has been our experience. And I think number one has been that the urgency and need to deliver to the smaller groups, those with less than 100 people or less than 100 units of requirement. This is some area that needs to have higher focus because they don't have the leverage. And that was our first focus. And secondly was, how can we deliver these within 2 days and get these to people in time? So that's been kind of the theme of this whole overall effort. So if we look at moving this down to southeastern Michigan, that's starting small. Obviously, we've got a critical path on frames. We do have adequate supply on optical materials. So we're looking towards growing that to about the same level as what we have in the UP now. So
I think you told me you did about 5,000 face shields in the last little while.
Yes, we've done 5,000s in about 90 facilities at this point. It sounds small, but we did try to look at reaching out, getting those that are really in need right now, and getting those out quickly. So that's been kind of the story here.
That's great, Chris, and I think you're highlighting something that's really important as we've been talking. You know, the focus is now becoming largely on readiness for reopening, which may create a larger surge in demand than we are truly realizing, and that the small companies are, and the small entities are really at the tail end of that. And like you said, don't have the buying power. We heard in the last conversation how a lot of these companies, oh, I need to order 1 million masks. Well, if I can't order 1 million masks, what do I do? So I think that's a really great thing to focus on. There's one question. I don't know if you're in a seat to see it, but it sounds like maybe you would be. Do you have any sense of when the asks were coming? Like, is this something that's just been a steady flow from these small entities that you've seen? Is this something that's going down, going up? What direction are the numbers going in terms of the asks that you're seeing?
Well, if I compare to the first week to the fifth week on our history here, we've gone from 300 to 1,100. This is the second consecutive week we've been making 1,100. So if you look at that growth, we're seeing a rise right now. And a factor that you just mentioned is very important, and that is that it's the efforts of reopening that are causing a lot of caution and re-looking at that first protection level and saying that, wow, we're trying to get back to normal, maybe prematurely, we don't know that. So we're seeing that we will probably, over the next 6 to 8 weeks, being at least constant or growing over what we're making today.
That makes a lot of sense. That's great. And it's neat to see you sharing those resources and working all across the state, which has just been one of the most amazing things, is to see the collaboration all across the state throughout this whole 2-month period. I'll ask really quick if anyone's got a question for Chris that you might like to ask. But we're really thankful that you'd come on and share your efforts. Do you have any specific needs, Chris, that you'd like people to be aware of?
I think the number one is that on the printed frame level, we're supplying a durable unit. It's a light duty. It's only less, it's probably 0.12 pounds, 0.13 pounds. And it's a first very quick way in terms of protection. 3D printed frames, yes, for Southeastern Michigan, we're looking at those as volunteers that can supply that to us. And that's probably the number one thing that we're reaching out for right now to get the numbers up for the efforts down there. Okay,
there's a group that we may end up having on. Are you familiar with the Protect MI group and the Make Collaborative down here? I was just talking with them earlier today, but I know that they've got resources to that end. So maybe we need to get you guys connected because I think they're seeing something similar, and it might be good to combine forces there. Have you bumped into them at all?
No, I have not.
Okay, we'll see if we can get some connections made on that. I think that they were talking about potentially coming on next week, so we can get you guys connected to continue that conversation. That's great.
Thank you.
Well, Chris, I really appreciate you being on. Thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you.
Great. Well, we want to bring you up to speed on a few different things here with respect to the FDA's emergency use authorizations. Like I said earlier, we've been privileged to be part of a number of EUA efforts. And to reiterate something that I mentioned last week, we're seeing an awful lot of interactive review templates from FDA. We're seeing a lot of collaborative efforts from FDA. They're really reaching out and trying to get these things cleared as best they can while still asking important questions. They still want to see individual systems tested. They're not willing to base things just on the principle of the effort. They're also really questioning in certain instances quality systems regulations. We saw one recently where they were saying, okay, we understand that you're not up to compliance on quality system regulations, but what can you tell us about how you expect that you will maintain quality for the product? So overall, just a great process that FDA has been putting forward. People are engaged, people are working with the companies, which is just exciting to see. Did want to let you know, as you see on the screen here, that FDA has reissued their imported non-NIOSH approved disposable filtering face piece respirators emergency use authorization. If you remember, maybe a month ago, when this first came out, maybe a little more than a month ago, the FDA was basically saying, you know what, we're just not seeing the quality out of these imported respirators. We don't trust them. You can be NIOSH, and that's great. You can be an Australian standards organization or Canadian or Japanese or European Union and maybe a couple others I'm forgetting. But sorry, guys, the imported stuff that we're seeing that doesn't meet those standards, we just can't guarantee the quality of it. It might not be protecting you at all. And they've unfortunately had to update this as of yesterday. And they have basically said, we need a way to take masks off our approved list. So they're actually going sort of backwards, and they're saying, you know what, there are masks on Appendix A, we're going to have to remove them. And so they've updated Appendix A. You'll still see some 3M and other imported masks there, but this is a pretty short list now. So it's definitely good to see the local manufacturers ramping up and stuff, because we're actually seeing this now. The scrutiny continues to rise. First, we didn't have this guidance, then we had it. Now they're controlling it even more. So that's the latest on imported masks. Definitely, if you've been importing masks or you intend to continue importing masks, check this list, because items have been removed from it. So if it was under the EUA, it may not be under the EUA anymore. I also want to update you really quick in terms of decontamination systems. Duke just yesterday got their EUA for a vaporous hydrogen peroxide decontamination system. We're still waiting to see some of the UV systems get out there, but right now the ones on the market or the ones with clearance anyways, are the vaporous hydrogen peroxide ones. And a quick update on Appendix B, which we love to keep track of in terms of the ventilators. There are quite a few ventilators that have made it through the EUA at this point since our last meeting. You see, I'm still having to scroll down to get to May 1st was our last meeting. And here we go. As of May 1st, Wilcox Industries, Elamaster, this BMC Medical out of China, Zibo. I'm not gonna be able to pronounce some of these, but you'll see that there's a bunch of new ones. Just to call out a few, we're seeing BCPAP, bubble continuous positive airway pressure, and BiPAP and other related systems. So there's quite a few ventilators now that have made it through under the emergency use authorization. Remember the multiplexers, they're still here. I think the last one we talked about was Formlabs printed BiPAP adapter. Covidian now has one. Safe Flight Instrument Corporation has a couple, and these are quad vents. So they've actually gotten FDA to say, okay, let's let you split a few more times. So it's good to see all these resources. As I know our respiratory therapist friends would remind us, that's not the desired thing to do. And in fact, the numbers when somebody gets put onto a ventilator don't sound like they're very good at all. So this is a last resort, but we're thankful to have those last resorts out there and available, and thankful to industry for pushing them forward and to FDA for making them possible. I just want to update you really quick that there are now 65, up from 53 last week, test kit manufacturers and commercial laboratories with EUA authorization. And only one high complexity test was added last week. We're up to 24 right now. So talking with Brandon earlier, you know, these are all these tests coming out, and it remains to be seen what's the demand going to be. There's two things that we're waiting for. One is the potential for a second surge. We don't know because not enough testing has been done. And then secondly, what's future life going to look like? Are we going to be concerned about testing live and repeatedly, or is this going to be sort of a one and done thing? I don't think anybody knows, but those are where those tests are. As we proceed in future weeks, we're certainly going to be talking about a lot of these same issues, and we're going to start to ask questions like, how is your company working on reopening? What sorts of other things are you working on that may be a little bit more inventive? And we want to continue the discussion on COVID. We also want to start to ask more wide-reaching questions and continue to keep the community connected as we have these discussions. What I want to do now is open it up for Q&A, If you have any specific questions about anything that you've heard on any of the shows, please raise your hand. Also, we're going to combine that with the open forum. If you have any thing you want to share, needs, or things that you're working on, please let us know and raise your hand now if you have anything that you'd like to share or ask. I have, I hope I get the name pronounced right, Kui Yang, you are live. Just unmute your mic.
Yes.
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. Hopefully you can remember me. We had a talk to each other about 10 days ago.
Very good, yeah. How are you doing?
Pretty good, and I'm busy with making, a lot of masks in Vietnam. So we are still working hard trying to, get more made. But we really want to achieve to N95 level. I know it will take a lot of time, but we still want to get it started. Even take 6 or 7 months, but we want to get it started.
Yeah, that's cool. And you guys are working on supplying, again, not imported from China, but from Vietnam, supplying right now basic filtration, right?
Yes, we got the FDA in class 1 registered already. Right now we are waiting for the registration number. So everything else we're done, but we want to get a move to class 2.
Yeah, very good. It's good to know. And make sure you share your information to the group here in the thing. I noticed that you had a question about the file that I was sharing earlier. Which can you remind me which that was?
Oh, it's the one you just shared with everyone.
Let's see. Oh, the one the FDA cleared ventilators or the
Oh yes.
Yeah, I'll put that in the chat here. This is the latest ventilator one, then everyone can get to that. That should be coming your way right now. Great. Well, it's good for that update. Appreciate that. Do you have any other things you'd like to tell us?
No, actually, I just want to find someone, who has the company or even branch in Vietnam. We really want to work closely with them and want to get it trained and even, we pay or something. We just want to get it started. Right now, we don't have anyone, can, work with us closely. So yeah, I want to get it started. Great.
Well, thank you for that. I'll reach out to you afterwards, and we can reconnect and see where things are. But I appreciate your checking in today on the show. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gene.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, bye.
Great. Any other questions, comments, needs, efforts? We'd love to hear from you. Roger Edheimer, you are live. Just unmute your mic.
Hello, Gene, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. First, I really appreciate your show. It's terrific. I have a question. I'm importing some isolation gowns, disposable isolation gowns. And I also know somebody who is importing some masks, I think KN95, and they were held up by customs because each piece was not in an individual bag. Is that the same for isolation gowns, class 1 isolation gowns, where each piece has to be in a separate bag? Or can you put like 10 pieces in a large poly bag?
That's fascinating. I'm gonna open it up to our staff if they have any comments. My initial gut reaction would be that you don't, unless you're claiming that it's sterile.
Right.
I can't see a reason why that would matter. You're saying they got held up at customs, and
this is regarding masks, which is separate than gowns. But I was just wondering if one has to do with the other.
Yeah, no, the guidances are different. The emergency use authorizations are different. Of course, like we've talked about before, the filtration aspect of the masks is what's really front and center in FDA's mind of the N95s. the water barrier and flammability is what's front and center in FDA's mind when it comes to the surgical masks. And then the gowns are much more focused on their different types, but there are different barrier levels. So how much protection are you saying you're going to give a person to splash and things like that? That's kind of what's in focus there. And as we've always said, the less you can claim, the better off you are in terms of the oversight. I don't know if that helps at all. If there's a more specific question.
Yeah, that helps a lot. I appreciate it.
Great, Roger. Thanks for calling in. If you are working on bringing those in and you have information, please do post it to all panelists and all attendees so that people can follow up with you if they have interest. We appreciate you being here. Great. I'll make one more call out for questions, comments, needs, or efforts that are underway. And I will make one more check to our folks on the Into Being side if there's any other items of news that we missed or anything like that. And not seeing any of those, I just want to thank all of you for being here today. It's been great checking in. Our focus is going to stay very much to highlight these things around the EUAs, to highlight these things around the diagnostics. And as we move forward, we're going to expand the conversation. We're going to start talking about what does it mean to return to work? How are we approaching that? Best practices. We're going to be talking to startups outside the core EUAs, and we're going to start to see how this is affecting them, where they're going, how the world is changing for them. But always we'll come back, and if there's news on the emergency use authorizations surrounding COVID, that will always be our first item of business. So I thank you for being here today and always, and look for the email coming around next week with all the contacts from this meeting. Once again, thank you all. Have a great day.